Sci Access, May 11, 2024. The first ever Parastronaut selections, a candidate's experience. Dr. Maria Elena Monzani.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you all for your patience. Yes, so I participated in the first Parastronaut experience selections for the European Space Agency. My name is Maria Elena Monzani. I am a white female. I have reddish brown hair. I'm wearing a black t-shirt. And my background my Zoom background has the League of the Space Age sculpture and the American flag because I recently became a US citizen. So I wanted to tell you my experience going through is a selection, hoping that this is helpful for this community. I grew up in Italy. Here you can see a photograph of my hometown. There is not a lot of town. I grew up in the mountains, so you can see mountains and a river. You may have heard the name of my hometown, which is San Pellegrino, and that's where the sparkling water is from. So not famous for space exploration or technology, but otherwise famous. I've been obsessed with space since I was approximately 3 years old. Here is a photo from a carnival parade in Italy in the 1980s. In Italy, we do carnival, not Halloween. And so that's when children dress up. And I'm wearing an astronaut costume, which was clearly homemade. I made it with my mom. The costume is blue. We stitched NASA letters on my legs and silver, what's the word, the bands on my arms. And I'm surrounded by other children dressed as clowns, fairies, princesses, etc. So I was singularly obsessed with space ever since I was a small child. I would be probably 8 or 9 years old in this photo, so I already knew that I was not eligible to apply as a NASA astronaut due to height restrictions. I have a disability, a physical disability. I'm a mobility impaired. The technical term is a skeletal dysplasia. I am very short, approximately 4 feet and 2 inches, or 127 centimeters. Here is a photo of me at Gran Sasso National Laboratory in 2001. I'm wearing a clean room suit, and I'm inside a physical equipment. I have a career in astroparticle physics and cosmology. Astroparticle physics is the part of physics that studies the intersection of microscopic and macroscopic and microscopic, very large things and very small things. And so this is, pretty close to studying the universe as I wanted to do ever since I was very young. And here is a photo of me in 2007 at the Kennedy Space Center. I'm standing near one of the space suits, the EVA suits from the Apollo era, and you can see roughly my size compared to the size of the standard astronaut, which is 2/3 of the size. I'll come back to it in a minute. Oh, something in the chat. Am I saying something wrong? Oh, Italian speaking. Oh, you live in Padova. That's amazing. Okay, so I applied to the Parastronaut feasibility project. This is the advertisement that ESA put out in early 2021. And I'm going to go into the requirements now. I'm going to zoom into this side of the slide. Sorry, I'm going to talk about the timeline first, and then I'm going to talk about the requirements. So the applications were open in April, May of 2021. I participated in in-person selections in 2 rounds, December 2021 and May 2022. I was not admitted to the medical phase of the selection, and I'm going to say a little more about that later. So I'm going to share some of my experience, and I'm going to share some of the insight I've gained. Please notice that this is not an official presentation from ESA, although everything I learned was influenced by my conversation with agency leadership and other candidates. I'm not affiliated with the agency, and I don't speak on behalf of them. So this is my personal perspective. So here are the requirements that For the Parastronaut category, I want to go over them really slowly. And basically, the requirement here is that the Parastronaut candidates needed to fulfill all the same requirements, educational and psychological, as the rest of the astronaut cohort, but they had 3 disability categories, which are listed here. One is lower limb deficiency, which is foot or leg below the knee, including amputation. Leg length difference or a short stature. Those were the 3 disability categories. So they only accepted mobility impairments for this round. I am very grateful to Sherry for sharing her misgivings about the word parastronaut. And being from Europe, I had a slightly different interpretation of it, which is parastronaut is a call out to parathlete or specifically paraswimmer. I'm a paraswimmer, and when I read this list of disabilities that they wanted to look for, it's basically 3 of the paraswimming categories, S5 through S7. It's most of those categories. And so that was immediately obvious to me what they meant. And basically, it's not a really, really technical description, but in space, people are floating. So this is a very good overlap with swimming. That's the closest physical activity to the swimming. So I'll be using independent, interchangeably, parastronaut or astronaut in my talk. This is part of my gratitude to the Paralympic movement. The first Paralympics that were shown on TV were in the mid-90s. It was the Atlanta Games in 1996. And I've had a history of being kicked out of sporting activities as a child because people didn't know that the Paralympic existed, and people thought that disabled people, physically disabled people, should be hidden. And I think that the Paralympic movement was instrumental in promoting the visibility of disabled bodies worldwide. So I'm very grateful to them, and that's why I'm not objecting to the use of the parastronaut terminology, although I don't like saying it. It's a very weird word. Anyways, moving on, these are the statistics of application. The ESA received about 23,000 applications. This is by country. Approximately a quarter of the applicants were female. And interestingly enough, the rate of admission, so there was a long 6 months to a year in which the HR medical team and selection team reviewed our applications, and about 5% of the applicants were admitted to the in-person selections, to the first round of in-person selection. I want to call your attention to this chart. Approximately 5% of the men were admitted to the selections, and 10% of the women were admitted to this, exactly 10% of the women. Europe doesn't have affirmative action. This was purely merit-based. This discrepancy gives you a flavor for the overconfidence of men or the underconfidence of women in STEM. Men will apply to something they may not be qualified for, just in case, and women will not. And so their success rate was twice as high, our success rate. So this is the timeline. Stage 1 was, as I said, screening, which took several months. They looked at qualifications. Stage 2 was in person. It was cognitive testing. Then there was, the first round was administered by the German flight medical organization. And the rest was administered by ESA directly. And stage 3 was psychometric and group testing, and then medical tests, and then the interview round. So I participated in what's called here stage 1 through 3. This is the statistics for the initial states, the initial in-person round. So there were 1,400 people who went to in-person cognitive testing, and 29 of them were people with physical disability, 8 of which were female, and out of 280 applicants. And you can see here, this is still 10% passing rate, which is the same as women. So people with disabilities are very careful not to apply to things that they're not qualified to. This is the testing day in Hamburg. I don't know if I was supposed to show the photo here of the other candidates. This was cognitive, technical, motor coordination, and personality testing, 1 full day of testing here. As I said, administered by the German Medical Aviation Agency. And I want to call out Sebastian Menze here, who's a fellow disabled person. He's an amputee and he's a climber. And there were 4, so every day had 2 groups of 12, and we had 2 more Parastronaut candidates who interviewed on the same day as I did. And I'm going to say a few words about that later. So we experienced, and we had a lot of fun at testing. During the testing, we got to meet the other astronauts. There was an incredible sense of camaraderie, and our group had their own mission patch, which we all bought and wore and brought everywhere. And our mission patch had pirates, and that was our definition of Parastronaut. So if you want to know what is our favorite nomenclature for astronaut with a physical disability, it is space pirate. That was chosen by an amputee, which I thought was great. So we all wore the pirate patch, and we showed it off. This is John McFall at the next round of the selection showing off his pirate, was the word, pirate mission patch. This is a photo of my stage 3 test at the European Astronaut Center in Cologne, Germany, with the other candidates. This is Michal Kruschel, who's also a disabled person. And the last, so at every stage, we were matched with at least one other participant from the special call, for the call for astronaut with a physical disability. The second round was psychometric testing, group exercises, and practical tests. It was mostly like an extended day-long psychological assessment. We had a tour of the European Astronaut Center. This is the Columbia training module. This is a photo of me in the Columbia training module. I should describe it a little better. I'm wearing black clothing. I'm holding a mask and a cell phone. This was in 2021. So all the testing was done with N95 masks. And I'm sitting in the Columbia module it's an exact replica of one of the modules of the space station. And that's where the astronauts actually do their training. This is not for tourists. This is not like at Kennedy Space Center. We were very lucky because Samantha Cristoforetti was in space that week. And so nobody was using the other career astronauts were busy with the interviews. So nobody was training in the training module, and we got to visit. This is a photo of my colleagues and I exploring the training module. There are 4 people in this photo, and I want to point out to the far right, Dr. Guillaume Wertz, who was at the time the medical director of ESA and was the director of this selection. He was extremely hospitable and extremely curious about the experience of the Parastronaut candidates. He gave us a tour of the European Space Center and the European Astronaut Center, sorry. He even drove us back to our hotel. He said, I'm a dad, I have a minivan, I will give you guys a ride. So that was exceptionally hospitable of them. Here is a photo of the neutral buoyancy facility. The photo is not very informative. The time I spent at the Astronaut Center gave me a glimpse for the intensity of the physical training that the astronaut of ESA go through during their first year and subsequently. This was discussed in the previous presentation, how hard it is to do sign language with a buoyant spacesuit, but also bending one's arm, with an inflated spacesuit in the swimming pool or in vacuum requires extreme strength. So, spoiler alert, I would not have survived the rigors of this kind of training had I been chosen as a para-astronaut candidate. So I want to say a little bit, I want to talk about a little bit about the selection criteria. And this is my interpretation of what the space agencies do, the government agencies, not the private teams. And the one criterion is minimize risk. And this applies to both disabled and non-disabled astronauts. And the goal is to minimize the risk to self, the risk to crew, and the risk to the mission. And so they were ruthless in discarding candidates. They started with 22,000 and finished with 5, and people could get kicked out for any. Kicked out is a strong word, but they were very, very, very ruthless. I think it's accurate. Basically, any small doubt was okay. Move on to the next candidate because we have a lot to choose from. Specifically for disability, they looked at, this is a word cloud that is shared about their thinking in terms of, for example, evacuating safely during launch and re-entry. So the disabled person needs to be able to leave the vehicle unassisted. They need to be able to deal with cabin depressurization, access emergency equipment, etc., etc., and obviously have enough health to not pose a risk to everybody else. This is interesting. Astronauts are strapped in their upper body and down to their knees, and so if somebody's wearing prosthetics on their leg, this becomes complicated on the engineering standpoint. Crew restraints. Okay, this is what I learned going through the process. One is genetic disorders have a broader risk profile than disability due to an accident. So I have a genetic disorder that affects every part of my body, each one of my joints, my eyes, my inner ear. I obviously will have a larger risk profile than an amputee because there are a lot of things that can happen to my body that have never been studied in microgravity. A person with an amputation, their body is, I'm going to say a very offensive word, and I'm going to use it as in, I'm going to say normal in quotes, and normal means average. An amputee is going to have an average body and which has gone to space before. Length of medical history is a risk factor. So if somebody there were 2 people who had similar accidents. One of them, they were able to save his leg because the accident happened in Europe and they had 30 surgeries to save his leg. The other person had an accident overseas in a middle-income country and they were not able to save his leg. And sure enough, getting an amputation is seen as less risky than 35 surgery to save somebody's leg. The physical component of ground training is grueling. I would not have survived that. And exercise is crucial in space. So how do we get adaptive equipment for exercise in space? This is actually a very interesting engineering problem that is exciting to me because of my background as a physicist. But for example, John McFall, who was ultimately selected, told me his running prosthetics are based on hydraulics. They're not going to function in microgravity. So that is a very, very interesting technical problem to think about that will require a lot of creativity. There is a lot of customization now, both on spacesuits and seat configuration. So most of the height requirements have been removed from all agencies worldwide, but there are considerations about balancing the load of spacecraft during takeoff and landing. And so that some of the engineers were a little bit nervous when I showed up at the European Astronaut Center because, Luca Parmitano was around the same day. Luca is probably 6'8". And so putting us both in a spacecraft would require some technology that they hadn't thought about yet in terms of mass and weight, et cetera, et cetera. So this is going forward. ESA did not publish results and statistics about the subsequent stages, but we all knew each other. There were 13 candidates that went to the in-person, that passed the first round of in-person selection, were admitted to the second round at the astronaut center. And then there were 4 parastronaut candidates invited to the medical assessment, all men. And then you know how this ends. These are 4 of the new members of the astronaut class. I'm going to say their names. Rosemary Coogan is from the UK, is an astronomer, and she was appointed to career astronaut. Sophia Deneau was a helicopter pilot from France, and she is also a career astronaut. And then Pablo Alvarez Fernandez is an aeronautical engineer and is also a career astronaut. And John McFall, that you all are familiar with, is an orthopedic and trauma surgeon with the background as professional athlete, and he is member of the Astronaut Reserve Corps. That's how the parastronauts were hired by ESA after the selection. And this photo actually has not 1, but 2 disabled men. John, as you know, here is very happy during a microgravity experiment, during training in Cologne. But Pablo Alvarez also identifies as disabled. He originally applied to the parastronaut call, and then during the evaluation of medical risk, it was established that his medical risk is low enough that he could be hired as a career astronaut, not as a special parastronaut, et cetera, in a separate category. He went on to the career track. I want to say a couple of words about ADHD. I was diagnosed with ADHD at the end of 2022. This is not a coincidence. This was after the selections. I'm one of the middle-aged women, the thousands of middle-aged women who were diagnosed with ADHD during the pandemic. I waited until the end of the selections, and there is a reason for it. ESA requires all applicants to clear FAA or equivalent medical in order to participate in the selection. FAA regulations for ADHD require no ADHD symptoms and no use of ADHD medication for at least 4 years. Now, round one of in-person selections includes cognitive, technical, and motor coordinating tests. I'm describing a pilot, airline pilot aptitude test, which I passed without ADHD medication. So this level of cognitive, I could achieve without ADHD medication. This means that, okay, let me make a distinction. I'm not really worried about Scott Kelly being in space without ADHD medication. He spent a year in space, he's fine, he's being very open about his ADHD symptoms. It doesn't matter if you have a whole space agency supporting you. But there are a lot of people, pilots flying planes with ADHD that's untreated. There is a lot of stigma about psychiatric conditions broadly. This does not make the airline industry safer, in my personal opinion. So this is a conversation that we need to have beyond astronaut selection. I'm going to conclude with acknowledgements. Here's a photo of me still at ESA with one of the docking modules. I heard about this opportunity from SciAccess and AstroAccess and Sarah Toddle. I heard it from 3 different ways. So thank you for letting me know this was happening. And I want to share my gratitude for ESA leadership, specifically Frank De Vidnik, Jon Bertz, and Antonella Costa. They are incredibly curious about our experience as physically disabled people. They were extremely hospitable, and they had a really creative approach to the challenges of bringing somebody who looks different to space. I experienced exceptional camaraderie with the other candidates. This is a photo of us in Cologne during the selection. I want to acknowledge my fellow astronauts with the candidates with physical disability. I mentioned Sebastian and Jacques Menfol earlier. I want to mention Michal Krushel and Pablo Alvarez, of course, who's a disabled man who became like career astronaut. And I want to acknowledge Lucy Rogers and the Women's Discord channel, which was very supportive. This was an life-changing experience of belonging. We talked so many times that disabled people are not an inspiration, that we don't want to be pitied, that we just want to be belong to whoever is there. And that's how I was treated by every one of the other candidates, disabled or otherwise. And it was really life-changing. It gave me a glimpse of what life could be like for disabled people if we really tried, if people were open to what we can bring to STEM, to technology, to space exploration. And I'm hoping that agencies will become more and more creative and extend this opportunity to, for example, people with sensory disabilities such as deaf and blind, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you so much for presenting, Maria. This was all fantastic information. At this time, we're going to be moving to Q&A. We have about 3 minutes for Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them using the Q&A feature. It is in either the bar at the bottom of your screen or along the top, depending on what device you are on. We do have some comments in the meantime, including one from Irene saying that they are from the Bergamo area too and work in London, and they work with ESA and UKSA to support the Parastronaut project.
Irene, thanks for your comment. My email is you can find it easily on the Stanford website. But anyways, monzani@stanford.edu.
I would love it if you could share that in the chat as well for any of our other attendees. We have a question from Adrian. What might have helped you with the astronaut training if you had been selected?
I don't think anything, and this is just too much for me. Here is something where we got stuck, and I had all the ESA medical team help me. There is a fitness testing, which requires heart rate testing. I have hip disease, so I cannot use a standard stationary bike, and I cannot not run on the treadmill. So for me to do fitness testing to bring my heart rate up to the required level, I would have to do it in the swimming pool. That's the only way for me to bring my heart rate to 150 safely without damaging anything else. And so we need a EKG machine that can go to water. This is not extremely challenging because I could do it with like a spacesuit, and that will work. There is no swimming pool in space. So how do I do exercise? How do I do the entirety of my fitness training in water? This would be an incredibly interesting problem. I would love to work on it. And, if Irene is available, I'm happy to talk to her. That would have been helpful to do all my fitness training in water.
That's fascinating. Thank you. We have another question from Sheila asking, what's next for you? What do you hope to see more for astronauts for disabilities, especially for those based in Europe?
I would love to consult with ESA on this project. I still have my day job as a cosmologist and a particle physicist, which I love. Like I said, this is a very creative problem. How do we figure out how to bring the disabled to space, or like everybody to space? And I love this group of people. This group of people at this conference, because they're thinking about these problems more creatively.
Sci Access. Learn more at www.sciaccess.org.